All right. So how do we think of ourselves? How do we see ourselves? Well, after 11 chapters of absolute rich, full doctrine, theology in Romans, the Apostle Paul finally switches to Romans 12. And Romans 12 onward to the rest of the book, it's now more the practical part of the epistle, of the letter. And that was typically Pauline, was what Bible commentators call it, where the Apostle Paul would start with half doctrine and theology, and now what does it look like in everyday real life? How does it look like practically? So that's where we find ourselves in Romans chapter 12. And he begins, before he gets into these practical aspects of the Christian life, as well as some gifts that God gives his church, he starts with, first and foremost, how do we think of ourselves? How do we see ourselves as Christians? Well, he says, don't think of yourself somberly, but think of yourself soberly. That's the interesting word, sober judgment. An illustration would be someone how they handle their liquor, how they handle the alcohol. You have someone who's too much or too little. You have some people when they get drunk, when they're too full of alcohol, they're very wild or crazy or jumping off the chandeliers, or they can be mean and nasty and just downright dangerous. And then you got some who are too little. They get the blues, they get depressed, they get sad when they're drunk. And so the Apostle Paul says, when you see yourself, don't think too highly of yourself, but also don't think too low of yourself. Don't think too highly, don't think too lowly. I'm not superhuman. I'm not more than human, but I'm not subhuman, less than human. I'm simply human. I have a healthy way of looking at myself, thinking of myself soberly, not too much, not too little, because either way it's sin. And either way is not the will of God for our lives and how we see ourselves. It's like sometimes we do this when someone has the same gift we have. Say, for example, you're called to praise and worship and you're a drummer. You see someone on stage who's drumming and you're thinking, man, they're a really good drummer. I'll never touch drumsticks again. That's thinking too lowly of yourself. Or thinking too highly, man, that drummer's not really that good. I'm much better. I've been in bands all my life. I could totally try out for the praise and worship team and do better than that drummer on stage. That's thinking too highly of yourself, thinking too much. To think soberly is thinking, man, that guy's got a gift. He's got the same gift I've got. He's a pretty decent drummer. I bet I'd be all right trying out for the praise and worship team. Maybe I would make it. You see, that's thinking soberly, not too much, not too little. And that's how the Apostle Paul says, that's how we're going to start chapter 12. It starts with how we see ourselves.